Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and get started. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. It's 11:02. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ivan Garcia. I work for the Butte County Association of Governments and have the privilege to serve as the RTPA moderator for this fiscal year. Here with me is my boss, BCAG's Executive Director, John Clark. Thank you all for joining this statewide RTPA meeting with our featured guest speaker, Mr. Darwin Musavi, who is the Deputy Secretary for Environmental Policy and Housing Coordination with the California State Transportation Agency, with CalSTA. I requested this meeting as a result of receiving questions after the last RTPA meeting in June. Thank you again, Darwin, for making yourself available to discuss Executive Order N1919 on short notice. I've included in the meeting announcement an agenda to get the discussion going and not meant to be all-inclusive. The agenda also includes two other attachments, including the Transportation Action Plan discussion draft dated July 21st, and a survey request that was sent out by CalSTA. I do want to point out a response to the survey is requested by next Friday, August 7th, and Darwin will be touching on that today. This is our first meeting with more than a dozen or so participants, so please be patient. Please mute yourself if not already muted. If you have any questions, please raise your hand via the Zoom feature. If we are receiving too many questions, I'll compile them, put them together, and forward those on to Darwin and get those responses back and distribute those to you all at a later date. This meeting is scheduled for 1 hour. With that, Darwin, please take over.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction, Yvonne, and thanks so much for having us. Appreciate the opportunity to engage more with the RTPA group. I know we only had a very brief agenda item at the last meeting. Luckily, I think I've gotten a chance to chat with many of you through other avenues as we've kind of done this tour through different groups and meetings to talk about the executive order. But, you know, I wanted to take this time to both for folks who maybe haven't heard the introduction to introduce you to the effort, but then reserve most of the time for discussion and questions. So, you know, I'll keep my remarks brief and then kind of fill in the gaps with whatever questions and discussions that you all want to have. Before I dive into that, I would love to do a very quick introduction of a couple of my colleagues who have been working on this effort. We've been working through an interagency effort to pull together an action plan for this executive order. So real quick, I'll turn it over to folks to do very brief introductions. I see Aegon.
Hi, good morning. Aegon Turpin with the Strategic Growth Council and Governor's Office of Planning and Research.
Hi, and this is Nguyen Taraki, Deputy Director for Climate Resilience in the Office of Planning and Research.
Hi, and this is Louise Bedsworth, Executive Director of the California Strategic Growth Council.
Hi, this is Natalie Fowler, Executive Fellow at CalSTA.
Great. Trying to see if there's anyone else from our work group. All right, that might be it. Well, thank you again for having us. So, you know, just to dive right into this effort, CalSTA, along with partner state agencies, is working on an action plan effort to implement EO N1919, the climate change executive order that came out last September. The executive order was a call to action on various administrative actions that could be taken to help us meet our ambitious climate goals that we have as a state. And in doing so, the governor called on CalSTA to help leverage over $5 billion of transportation investments to meet these climate goals. And many of you have probably heard me already talk about this, but just briefly by way of introduction, I think we're really the way we're interpreting those words is really about looking at the investments that we make as a state. These are the competitive state competitive programs in transportation, as well as programs like the SHOP, where the state has direct project selection influence over projects as well. We're thinking about how do we maximize the climate related outcomes that we can get out of those programs within kind of the existing statutory intent and bounds of those programs. So this is really an effort about how do we think about the prioritization of what we're funding with those programs, and within those programs to align our outcomes with climate change. I'll say right off the bat that many of those programs already do that. Many of the work, a lot of the work that you all are doing already does that. Programs like the Active Transportation Program or the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program are very much aligned with the goals in the executive order to increase walking, biking, and transit usage as a way to drive down our dependence on driving. And then there's other programs where there's a lot of work that's happening that also aligns with these efforts, but given that there's limited funds, we really want to take a strategic look and think about how do you prioritize those funds in a way that get us as close to our goals as possible. But we also understand that the way these goals can be implemented across the state varies depending on context, and solutions in an urban area are going to be very different than solutions in a suburban area, which are going to be very different than solutions in a rural area. And then the regional context, even between various rural areas or urban areas, differs across the state. And these are challenges that we always have with transportation planning, particularly with statewide programs and dollars, and are the types of issues that are both at the forefront of our minds and the types of issues that we'd love to hear from you all in terms of given our common goals to meet the governor's mandate on furthering our ability to reduce emissions and prepare for climate change. How do we take those considerations into account as we implement the executive order? And I'll say the other thing I'll say is that this effort is not just about programming of projects, but also very much about planning and what actions can the state take to further support building a good bench or pipeline of projects to feed into these programs. And a lot of work that fits into all these categories is already underway. There's various initiatives that you all know about that are happening, but this action plan is an opportunity to kind of pull all those together and provide a kind of comprehensive list of what all is happening around the state, and then take on new actions as well. I'll say briefly before I open it up that in terms of process-wise, we've put together a list of strategies that we think implement the direction of the governor's executive order and are asking for your input on what types of actions are appropriate for us to take to really get at the governor's executive order's goals, and in the same light, what actions are not appropriate for us to take. And so the survey that we sent out several weeks ago that's due August 7th is the first opportunity for you all to provide that input in writing, but there will be, in addition to this opportunity, there will be many more over the coming months. We plan to hold some workshops this fall, and then thereafter release the draft action plan that will then come with its own set of opportunities for feedback as well. So I know I went through all that very quickly, but wanted to leave as much time for discussion as possible. So maybe with that, I can start to answer some questions.
Questions? Well, I'll get us started. Hey, Darwin, the executive order came, was it September?
Yes.
You know, given it was pre-COVID, is there any thought or consideration as to, I don't know what your target is in order to have, you know, well, first off, when's your target to get this done?
So, you know, Yvonne, I think where you're going with this question is, you know, how are we thinking about getting, you know, input given our current circumstances, and how does that impact the timeline? And, you know, I think to answer your question about what our target is, I think we have to first acknowledge that it's a moving target, because what's most important to us is getting that input. And, you know, the latest kind of public timeline we put out there was an adoption of the plan by February 2021, but we're actively looking into, you know, potentially pushing that back if we need to make sure that we have opportunities for engagement between now and then. You know, I think the you know, plan as of right now is that once the survey closes, the next opportunity for engagement would be some workshops this fall, and thereafter a release of the draft by the end of the year is what we're thinking. And we're starting to feel like, you know, we could potentially use, you know, after that there probably, after the first draft, there'll probably be a need for some iteration based on the input that we get, and that pushing out the date beyond February for adoption might be prudent. So we're looking into that right now. So it's, the short answer to your question is that it's February, but will most likely get pushed out even further to make sure we have opportunity for input.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else?
Yvonne, this is Sarkis.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Darwin. Good to see you.
Sarkis.
Doing well.
Good to see you as well.
I was interested in terms of the outreach that you're doing. Is there going to be a opportunity to present this at like a larger statewide forum? Like, is it going to be presented to the CTC?
Yes, great question. So, you know, the answer is yes. In terms of timing of when we're going to do that, we're currently eyeing the November joint meeting between CTC, CARB, and HCD as like a kind of unveil of what comes out of the workshops, and having workshops before that is the plan to feed into that. So allow for people to have some you know, specific engagement on workshops that, you know, might be modeled a little bit around you know, again, you know, COVID makes it difficult, but kind of like how the CTC holds guideline workshops, those types of workshops, and then going into a statewide meeting like the joint meeting. There may be other opportunities beyond that for an update on the effort at the CTC as well as an agenda item, even, you know, before or after that. But short answer is yes, we will definitely have statewide kind of more formal engagement opportunities, both through our workshops and then through existing bodies like the joint meeting and the CTC meeting.
Okay. Jillian.
Thank you, Darwin. My name is Jillian Gazzato with the Riverside County Transportation Commission. And so I read through the draft action plan, and it got me thinking. I mean, the executive order itself got us thinking back in September about how getting SB1 passed not being an easy task, as I'm sure you were probably aware. In Riverside County, it was a pretty tough sell, and our legislators made some really difficult votes, but did so knowing that Riverside County couldn't fund all of the needed transportation improvements without the state's help. So wondering if you could speak to, you mentioned in your background this morning that, you know, it's not a one size fits all, and strategies that work for urban are not the same as for suburban and not the same as for rural. So how do you envision being able to, I guess, not exclude suburban and rural needs, especially in a county that is the fastest growing in the state and is contributing to building a lot of the state's housing needs?
Thank you, Jillian, for that question. I mean, you know, I think this is at the crux of, you know, part of the most challenging pieces of implementing this executive order, obviously. So I appreciate you helping us dive right into that conversation. You know, and I, you know, welcome thoughts and perspectives from others on my team as well. But what I'll say to that it is going to be quite a constant balancing act to thread that needle. You know, I think we are at a high level, I will say, we are interested in thinking about, you know, I think we can all acknowledge that the state doesn't have enough resources and funds to support, you know, every local and regional transportation need that comes after state funding. You know, we see that with the subscription rate of state programs and the amount of projects that do get funded. And we also acknowledge that, you know, this is not meant to be a shift that, you know, in any way kind of shifts the scale from certain regions to others in terms of where the money goes. Like, that's not the intent either. So keeping those frameworks of, we don't have enough money to do everything. We want to continue to have a balance of where the money goes. How do we then work with you all to make sure that we're funding the things that you all want to do that are most aligned with our goals, if that makes sense? So that's kind of how we're thinking about it. You know, that at a high level. And so, you know, frankly, we don't have all the answers in terms of the best way to do some of that and to both get a change to have the state dollars really target the types of projects that move the needle on climate change, while doing that in a way that does maintain those pieces that I mentioned. You know, it's gonna be a difficult needle to thread, but that's why we're, you know, engaging all of you for your ideas on what works best in your regions. And, you know, I think we've seen some of the difficulties of that play out, you know, for example, with the implementation of SB 743, which is an ever evolving effort on the VMT side, as we need to continue improving methodologies on how to make those methodologies a lot more context specific and nuanced to the various contextual issues as it relates to VMT. And, you know, I think, you know, we're in terms of tools and methods, you know, I think that's where we can make the most progress in getting to some of that nuance to make sure that things don't get lost in translation between regions. But yeah, it's, you know, I think to me, one of the best ways we can do that is thinking about our funding is less about, you know, what we don't want to fund and more about how do we encourage and create an effort to really hold up the gold standard projects, to have people kind of coalesce around those and find pathways to compete for wanting a gold standard project in their region as well, within the bounds of what the context that exists and the commitments that you've made and the scopes that you have on hand, obviously. So I know that doesn't fully answer your question. Let's see if others have anything to add to that.
Yeah, good morning. No, Jillian, thank you very much for the question. Egon Terplin with OPR and Strategic Growth Council. And I was involved with helping get Regions Rise Together launched last year, which was really an effort from the administration to understand the distinct regional economies of California. And so what Darwin's saying is exactly right. It's really about how do we work with you all to accelerate the kinds of projects that align with your vision, that align with the state goals and direction we're trying to go. And so maybe a question I would ask you or others on the phone are, what are some of those projects that you think are critically important to your region's further growth, development, economic opportunity, that either A, you might be concerned with language, or you see an opportunity in this? And I think we've heard from folks throughout the state, huge opportunity to align some of what you're doing with this as well. So I think, but that's exactly what this dialogue is really about understanding those distinctive regional economies.
Thanks. If I might just respond quickly, as far as some of the priority projects, at least in Riverside County, and I would imagine a lot of other inland self-help counties are in similar situations. Our expenditure plans, many of the line items in there for the projects identify adding lanes. So essentially freeway capacity. It's not specific to general purpose lanes, so there is a little bit of flexibility there, and we have been able to use that already to date, by adding the 91 express lanes into Riverside County, and we're about to open our 15 express lanes. But with the growth that we're seeing, that we've been seeing, and we continue to see in our county with more affordable housing and land availability, it's just really challenging to pick out the few transit projects or VMT not inducing projects in our county, because I just don't feel that we're quite set up that way. And so we built the extension of the MetroLink, which was back a few years ago. That was probably our biggest transit project that we had identified in our expenditure plan. And the ridership, even before COVID, is just not really there. And we're trying our best. We're incentivizing and we're doing, increasing service and doing our best to make that work for folks. But it's really challenging in the suburbs and in the rural areas. So we really look forward to working with the state on making sure that policies and solutions aren't, don't discriminate against the suburban and rural areas, because we do still have really important projects that matter to our residents that may not align perfectly with, with what the state's trying to achieve.
Jillian, thank you so much for helping dig into that a little bit. I think your point about the fact that I think you used the words that things may not be quite set up in a way that support some of these things, and I think that's a really critical point and challenge here, and something that we should acknowledge from the get-go, is that transportation and these transportation projects are just one piece of this puzzle. And I think that's what often makes this conversation challenging, is that you all are really only many of you, depending on what agencies you work for, are really only in charge of that one piece. Yet you know, a lot of what we're talking about here really does have to do with what land use choices and decisions are being made. You know, what does the jobs housing balance look like in various regions? And, you know, broader questions around development patterns, where I firmly believe that transportation has a huge role in influencing, but I know is not the kind of end all be all in terms of those decisions, and those decisions are happening outside of the scope of the transportation project. So totally hear you on that, and that's, you know, obviously, you know, since the writing of SB 375 has been something that the state's been grappling with, and that's not gonna go away. But I just wanted to acknowledge that we totally understand the position that you're in, and that the you know, transportation in and of itself not solve all these issues.
And Darwin, that's consistent with what I'm hearing of the concern of one size doesn't fit all, and just the diversity within the state. Other issues or concerns, the quality of life, just, you know, some places are congested and they need that additional lane of capacity, but see that being challenging moving forward. So, anybody else?
Hey, Darwin, this is Mike Woodman with Nevada County Transportation Commission. Appreciate, you know, the comments in terms of trying to recognize the context and the differences between urban, suburban, and rural transportation projects. You know, Ergon, you had mentioned, you know, some different examples of projects that, you know, might not fit perfectly. You know, I think our project in Nevada County on State Route 49, you know, in essence, we are adding capacity, but I think it fits with the majority of the strategies. And I think, you know, maybe a little bit of wordsmithing on a couple of the strategies just to provide some more clarity and flexibility would work. But our project, for example, the main focus of the project is to improve safety and operations on the highway. Many segments of the highway are just a 2-lane rural state highway with high accident and fatality rates. In some segments, we don't bubble to the level of triggering state safety funding, but in essence, to the community, and, you know, it's a safety project. And Darwin, this probably predates you joining CalSTA, but maybe just a year or two ago, the citizens in the county embarked on a huge email letter campaign, and you know, CalSTA and Caltrans and CTC and even our office were flooded with folks saying, hey, you need to fix this highway, you know, how many more people have to die? So, you know, in essence, it's a safety project, and also fresh in the minds of our community, you know, is safe evacuation routes for wildfire danger. We're up in the foothills, and, you know, it's not a matter of will it happen, it's a matter of when. So we want to improve the highway to have safe evacuation route, and also just provide, you know, the separation. Some of these rural highways, you know, you're going to go from a 2-lane highway to a 4-lane highway, and that's it. That highway's never going to grow. But you're going to have safe operations into the future. So those are the kind of things. Also, when you look at induced demand in rural areas, the elasticities from the urban research aren't applicable. And a lot of the characteristics that drive induced demand aren't present in these rural highways in the context of certain projects. So you don't have induced demand in VMT. So, you know, we just have to take all of those things into consideration as we move forward on this. And, you know, of course, when something's new, we're always a little hesitant, and you know, we're looking at each word and trying to figure out exactly what it means. So just appreciate the opportunity to continue to work with you. I know we're going to be meeting with the Rural Counties Task Force next week, and then also maybe work with you through the North State Super Region, just to kind of talk through some of these things and make sure we're truly considering the rural context.
Thanks, Michael. I mean, you know, I think a lot of what you raise are you know, things and issues on our radar. You know, would very much appreciate, any time that you all are willing to take through the survey effort to work with us to think about, okay, if we really are interested in the goals that we're interested in here, how do we, what types of actions do we take, or how do we frame those actions in a way that does articulate what you're talking about? And, it's any and all language or support you can provide. We often use, broad terms with a lot of this stuff, but when it comes down to like actually evaluating and prioritizing projects, what should we be looking for? I guess is the question that that we don't have to answer on this call, but in terms of information that we'd love to get from all of you, I think a key example that you brought up now that's one is, whether there is or isn't induced travel is obviously a key tool we could use to help differentiate various, and then the question becomes, okay, well, what level of? But still, I think there's something there that does allow for kind of a clear distinction or a place to make sure that some of these rural projects don't kind of get caught up in the bigger vision and goal of what we're trying to accomplish on VMT reduction. And then, then it, I think, implores us to come up with the other thing that we need to think about that we, I know you all are thinking about this as well, is, okay, then what types of things are we incentivizing for rural jurisdictions to think about? Because, to me, I think of it as, rural jurisdictions are not necessarily set up to be thinking about, nor should they have to think about the small amount of VMT that they contribute statewide, but there is the potential for, the wrong decisions leading to VMT growth. So, what do we, how do we, so maybe it's more of a conservation type question, but, what do we, how do we think about that? Any thoughts or suggestions any of you have, would welcome those.
Yeah, we'll definitely look forward to working with you, because I think we have some good ideas on how to address that.
Great, thank you.
Adrian, in orange, I know you had your hand up and I don't see it up anymore.
Hi, Yvonne. Yes, it's Adrienne Cardoso with OCTA. Darwin, I just wanted to thank you also for having this meeting with us and inviting all of the RTPAs to come and speak with you. I put my hand down because I think, I'll just share, I think my question was related to the strategies and just looking through them. I think there is some flexibility that was provided, but I think for us that resulted in kind of maybe not fully understanding all of the language that's used and just wanting to get a better understanding of what the expectation is through some of the strategies. And it sounded like, you're kind of working at it from the other side, which is, maybe we're to tell you what we think it is. But I wanted to check in and see if there's opportunity to maybe get some, direction in terms of, I think we have an idea on some of them and we think we might know, but it would be helpful for us if there was a little more information. And also what the other question I was going to ask, but I think you answered that already, is just the survey and whether or not there are opportunities outside of the survey to comment. And it sounds like you're open to that, that we're not just limited to the survey. So we do appreciate that as well. And then I was thinking if you were going to, provide a presentation on the strategies as they exist, that perhaps the October CTC meeting might be a good opportunity between now and, completing the activities or the actions that are related to the strategies. It might be a good venue to kind of take an interim step. But those are just my thoughts. Thank you for having this meeting with us. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Adrian, for that, and yes, very much open to to receiving feedback. Even, you know, at the risk of getting inundated, I'll even open up and say that, you know, beyond the surveys, you know, feel free to reach out to me if you have any other specific feedback that you'd like to share kind of informally. You know, we're really wanting to make sure that we're approaching this the right way in terms of the language and the strategies and some of the maybe vagueness there. Some of that is frankly on purpose. You know, I think that we wanted to leave room in terms of there's a broad kind of range of the types of actions we can take on some of this stuff, and we really want the specific actions that we take to drive this. You know, the strategies are kind of a framing of to give you a sense of like what are our goals that we're looking at implementing here, and then, you know, within that framework, you know, I think really what makes or breaks this effort is like, what do we actually, you know, commit to doing? That's going to be really driven by the actions. Like we can say we're committed to this high level goal, but it's the steps thereafter that we decide to take and implement that will really be meaningful. But yeah, if there's anything we can clarify in terms of the language of the strategies or questions, yeah, feel free to shoot us a note. I can make sure, I think you all should have my contact information, but I can make sure that you have that.
Thank you.
Jillian, you still have your hand up. Did you have another question?
No, I thought once I spoke, it would take my hand down. I'll do that now.
Put your hand down. Nikki.
Hi, my name is Dominica Smith, better known as Nikki from Metro. I'm one of the managers of transportation planning there, and definitely just wanted to take time out to thank you again as well for having this meeting with us and the opportunity to provide some sort of feedback to you in person, kind of virtually, right? So
in person, yeah.
Right, in person. In a nutshell, I just wanted to basically share that we've thoroughly reviewed the language within the executive order and the key strategies, all 10 of them, and have been vetting them internally to get a sense of where we feel like they're in line with some of Metro's priorities and programs, right? And in a nutshell, we can kind of say today that we are in support in concept, right? A lot of clarifying still needs to be had. The language as written is pretty broad, and it circumpasses a whole lot, right? So we definitely want to further discussions with your agency as this develops. We appreciate the opportunity that you'll be having other opportunities for us to participate in maybe other workshops that you said are planned ahead, as well as, you know, further development of the document and the key strategies. But we are very appreciative of the direction that it's flowing in right now. And like I said, it's not totally 100% our, you know, in line with everything. And there are areas for improvement or areas for strengthening some of the language, but we definitely appreciate the forward direction that's being taken right now. So thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to working with you as this develops further.
Great, thank you so much for those comments and for your support. Looking forward to continued engagement, and yeah, like I said earlier, open to your feedback.
Anybody else? Darwin, do you want to touch on the survey, how those questions were developed, how you're going to use that information? Anything?
Sure, I can chat a little bit about the survey. You know, so the survey is our frankly novice approach in a world of COVID to try to get some collective digital feedback from you all to really kind of get a pulse of where, you know, some of the multiple choice questions are about getting a pulse of where people's interests and concerns are. And then the open-ended questions are about, you know, generating ideas on you know, what we could potentially do to implement this action. So there's a couple questions in there that ask about, you know, which of the strategies you find most important. We ask which ones need further discussion, and you know, if there's strategies that we're missing, and we'll use that information to really kind of tee up where to have a deeper discussion in workshops, and you know, get a pulse of. Again, we'll cover all of it in workshops, but you know, given limited time and capacity in a day, like where do you actually have some deeper dive conversations, and where's there the most interest? That dive deeper will be dictated based on the responses we get there, and then your open-ended responses on action item ideas are really meant to kind of help inform and add to our brainstorm on, you know, how should we be thinking about implementing some of these strategies, so we'll be taking those in, and you know, again, we're hoping that this can be an actually fairly focused and concise action plan document. You know, we want to commit to things that we can actually do. So, you know, we are going to stay away from a giant laundry list of hundreds of actions. It's going to try to be a lot more focused than that. So, but the hundreds of action item ideas that you all give will be kind of aggregated and thought about as part of that process to come up with some potential actions that we then bring to you all in workshops to further get information on. And I see some stuff coming through the chat. More formalized schedule, where will it be posted? Have I missed it? We have sent out a schedule. Usually every time we do one of these meetings, we send out a schedule. I don't know if I forgot to give one to Yvonne for this one, but I can get an updated schedule. You know, I have been lately a little bit more hesitant to reshare my old schedule since we're reevaluating it, but I will give you guys, I'll make sure you all have our most recent schedule with the understanding that some of those dates may get pushed out even further if we find that we need more time to engage everyone.
Okay.
And then what do we have here? So it looks like there's a question or a comment. Suburban and rural areas are facing quadruple the regional housing allocations in the next round of RENA. We're going to redirect investment away from disadvantaged rural areas into affluent cities. How is HCD going to adjust the RENA process to follow this large change in policy? Will more housing requirements be sent to the cities through the process as well? There's a lot to unpack there. You know, I don't think it is if you're implying on the transportation side, if we're looking to redirect investment away from disadvantaged rural cities to affluent areas, that is not our intent. I think, I don't know, maybe you can further clarify your question. Are you meaning on the transportation end of investments?
Who asked that question?
Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to raise my hand. I couldn't figure it out, sorry. Ben Kimball, Tulare County Association of Governments. We see a lot of the impacts of some of these policies affecting rural areas more than urban areas as far as maybe in a per capita basis of investment. Some of these rural areas don't have the infrastructure necessary for really high quality transit or really high density housing, for example, that might fare well with this kind of direction. So there is these large changes have a very significant impact. The smaller your communities are, the greater the impact they are when they lose what little kind of the funding that they're accustomed to. We predict a possible loss in funding if it's redirected towards specific projects that favor kind of really dense areas. But that being said, I was wondering how this affects the RENA process. We haven't seen this RENA process play out yet, so there's kind of a lot of questions still. There's some unknowns how it's going to go. Our early indications are to expect in our areas, a quadruple allocation of housing to plan for. And yet we see through an executive order like this, kind of a departure from supporting housing in kind of rural areas or low density areas in favor of high density areas. Is RENA going to reflect that? And it doesn't look like it's going to reflect it at this time, but it, you know, we're kind of wondering if you guys have any insight on that yet, how RENA is going to match up with this executive order.
Sure. Let me maybe start with the first part of your question before getting into RENA, but talking about, you know, the as you described it, shift of funds to more affluent or urban areas. You know, I honestly don't, you know, I don't see that as our intent here, or frankly the outcome. I know that the existing pipeline of projects that exists right now, you know, if you were to kind of reprioritize that, the jurisdictions that are maybe more prepared to immediately, you know, meet some of those objectives listed or strategies listed might be more urbanized areas. But you know, I kind of firmly believe that these strategies do really apply across the state, and in some places, what's needed to get us there is a lot more planning and support from us from the state, given, you know, like you mentioned, a lot of smaller jurisdictions are resource strapped and don't have the ability to do a lot of that on their own. So I almost, you know, I'm hoping that this effort actually results in maybe a further focus from the state in areas like yours, where we really do think about, okay, you know, what does, you know, regardless of projects on the shelf right now, and regardless of what happens with those, you know, a lot of them will still continue to be pursued and funded and implemented. But in places where we feel like there are shifts that need to happen, what does that look like, and what kind of planning is needed to think about the context of a corridor, how to maintain its safety, and to continue improving people's mobility around that corridor in a way that supports the executive order's goals as well. So I feel like there's an opportunity there for those types of discussions. In terms of how this ties to RENA, you know, I don't think HCD has joined us today, even though they are in our work group. I don't want to speak on behalf of HCD, and it's not an area that I directly am very heavily engaged in. So, you know, can get back to you on it and won't comment on it specifically. But I will say at a higher level, like, that we are working as a state to make sure that, you know, we are kind of setting up umbrella policies that are in coordination, and that we're not in one place signaling, you know, development interest in one direction and then signaling something completely different with another arm of the same administration. So at a high level, we are working on that. So if there's a perception that that's not how it's going to play out, you know, happy to discuss further, and I can loop back with HCD as well.
That's a good point on how they're all related and affecting each other to discuss more. Laurel, you have your hand up.
Hi, yes, thank you. I think you actually started answering my question already, Darwin, but maybe you can kind of add to it. But you mentioned that transportation is just one piece of the puzzle, and I'm wondering if you can tell us a little more about what other parallel efforts are going on, you know, possibly with the other the other agencies that are involved in this, and how, and whether these investment strategies are, you know, shared strategies across the board between all of the agencies, or what strategies the other agencies are pursuing, and whether those will, or how those would leverage transportation funding further. And my other question is whether you have or will you be engaging with private sector stakeholders?
Great questions. I think, the agencies that are involved in this effort, we've kind of been collectively working on drafting these strategies as a way to implement this action plan effort. And I think broadly speaking, they're kind of in line with the administration's frame on these issues across the board. Maybe I'll turn it over to Aegon, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, to talk a little bit about some of the other efforts and initiatives and how this ties into, thinking about the other pieces of the puzzle. And then I can answer the question about the private sector.
Sure. Yeah, no, this is a great question. I think in general, everything that people are getting about different contexts, but also the relationship between the transportation space and fundamentally market conditions, growth dynamics, the land use patterns, decisions made elsewhere. And one of the efforts that we've been involved with and have spoken with a number of your agencies, more the MPOs, and are starting a process is actually looking at the structure of regional planning and the SCS RTP process, and how can we work with the regions to really help you achieve those goals? How could we work with you? What changes could be made to make it easier for you to address these broad state goals, laws that we're all collectively a part of? So that's very much a collaborative process that's just getting going. That's really trying to understand that, because the RTP SCS is sort of a core document to think about growth in partnership, region to local, and then state, of course, to region as well. So that's one area. Happy to speak more to that. Also quickly, I don't know if my colleague Nuantara or Louise want to say anything more about other pieces, but just quickly on the RENA point that was also raised. I think there's a lot of changes currently going on with RENA, and we're seeing major increases very much also in the urban centers as well in various parts of the state. So that's a series of laws that have been passed over the last couple of years are shifting where that goes, in part to make up for the fact that we haven't been producing a sufficient amount of housing for many years, which is a dynamic we're all continuing to face. So yeah, I don't know if any other colleagues want to jump in with other pieces, but again, happy to talk more with any of you on the question, particularly on the SCS RTP equation as a core way to help move these forward.
Yeah, this is Nuantara. I would just add in, just very generally, I think to the question around aligning different efforts and funding and priority areas is one of the areas that's kind of importance to us, and the work that we're doing in the resilience space is also trying to think about how we are making investments that help prepare communities for the impacts of climate change, and thinking about how we're making investments that are incorporating future climate impacts into decision making. And some of that obviously touches on the land use and housing pieces that Aegon just touched on, but then also even thinking about how we're thinking about transportation infrastructures and the safety components that are needed in emergency evacuation and wildfire, or issues around flooding or drought and other extreme heat. So we're trying, as we're participating and engaging in this process, also trying to think about where there's opportunities for that type of alignment across state agency efforts as well.
And if I just add one other really quick piece that I should not have neglected, we're also very involved with a series of regional economic development strategies, many of them in some of your respective regions. And we keep saying we would love for all the transportation agencies and planning folks to be much more involved in what can be a more siloed jobs, economic recovery, workforce development conversation, but obviously what you're all doing is part of that. So that's another effort that we're very involved with through GoBiz and the Labor Department. In a number of regions, and a lot of them you all yourselves may be involved in your own regional specific or county specific economic recovery conversations that's also happening, because as is clear from this conversation, these issues are all integrated and we can't really solve them just one separate from the other.
Thanks, Egon. And then, the last part of your question, Laurel, that I wanted to answer, and looks like in the chat, Adrian kind of touched on this as well. Definitely agree that making sure voices, whether they're, nonprofit advocacy or private sector voices that are beyond kind of government agency, transportation agency voices are important to this conversation as well. I think the workshops will be a key place to make sure that those voices are invited and heard, because ultimately we're all here to serve the public. We wanted to make sure that this, as the implementers of these projects, so we give you all the opportunity to really understand and engage early in what's happening here, but ultimately, we want to make sure our work is not only driven by you all as the implementers, but that we're really responding to and reflecting to the broader, constituents of the state of California that see transportation as a key piece to other state goals. So.
Thank you, Darwin.
Anybody else? We got 2 minutes. If we do introductions, that'll carry us till 3 p.m. No? Anybody? Darwin, I would like to invite you to attend future RTPA meetings just to keep that dialogue going. With that, want to thank everybody for participating. Darwin, any closing remarks?
I just wanted to say thank you, Yvonne and everyone else, for this opportunity to chat with you all again. I think that this has been helpful for us as we continue to hear your kind of perspectives. It starts to kind of shape our perspectives as well in terms of how to really dig into and talk about this stuff and set it up in a way that really does get some changes of outcomes without sacrificing efforts that you all are doing that are important, that need to continue moving along, regardless of the increased focus on climate change. So I appreciate the dialogue and look forward to continuing engaging. And I know I'm a broken record, but please, if you have the time, fill out our survey and provide us with your input and comments.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all.
everyone.
Happy Friday.
Back to work.
Mhm.